I simulated the remainder of the 2022 Formula 1 season to see where every team and driver will finish. Can Verstappen defend his title? Will Mercedes pass Ferrari? And who will finish fourth between Alpine and McLaren? Stay tuned to find out. My name is Chris, welcome back to CF Racing, and enjoy the video. Hello everybody, what's going on? Chris here, otherwise known as CF Racing, and today everybody, I am doing a little bit of a different simulation, as this is not a typical sort of simulation where I go into my team career mode, just simulate all 10 races or all 16 or whatever I normally do, get the stats and just put them into a template at the end of the season. No, this is going to be a little bit different. There is a feature in the Formula 1 game called regular season start or something like that, and I joined it basically as Williams and replaced Nicholas Latifi just so I would finish last every race, just to see what would happen for the remainder of the season. There are currently 9 races left in the 2022 Formula 1 season. So basically what I did is that I joined all 9 races as Nicholas Latifi, or as the default driver replacing Latifi. I went into qualifying, I did not put in a lap, so basically I'd be starting basically from last every single race unless somebody got a penalty, and then I would go into the race right off the start after turn 1, because there might be some chaos that happens in turn 1. I would just DNF from the race basically, and we'll see what the game does from there. Let me know in the comment section down below who you guys think will win the championship. Who do you guys think will finish in second in the Constructors' Championship between Mercedes and Ferrari? Also, let me know who you guys think is going to finish fourth between McLaren and Alpine, because I want to know what you guys think and I want to know what the game thinks too. Also, I do want to say this is in regular career mode, so teams will be doing upgrades throughout the season, and I'll do my best to stay on top of the upgrades from there as well. Also, lastly, if you guys are new here and you enjoy simulation content like this from me, then hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends. We are on the road to 20k right now, and I think we can get there. So that being said, guys, let's start the simulation.
Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the grid lineup for today's race. World champion Max Verstappen starts from pole position, and a very happy Carlos Sainz will start second. Looking down the rest of the grid, we have Perez, Leclerc, George Russell and Ricciardo, Norris, Hamilton, Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda, Bottas, Vettel, Pierre Gasly and Stroll, Magnussen, Albon, Mick Schumacher and Guan Yu Zhou. Lawrence and Esteban Ocon lines up at the back of the grid. It's almost time for those 5 red lights to go out then. Let's see who can prevail today. Whether they could pull off the win here at Spa-Francorchamps, but they've done so in spectacular style. Anthony, tell me, what was it that helped them achieve this success?
I'd say it was down once again to good, consistent driving, nailing the corners, working to the track conditions and perfecting the team's strategies. They got all of these things right today, and the results speak for themselves.
Here come our winners now, a thrilling race and a tremendous effort by Ferrari. Their history is well known, so it's no surprise to fans the world over to see them come out on top once again.
So in Spa, right after the break, Charles Leclerc ends up winning the race in Belgium. It was actually quite an interesting race, I gotta say, as Leclerc started 4th, ended up going into 1st and getting fastest lap, taking 26 points and gaining quite a few on Max Verstappen as he finished in P2. Sergio Perez rounds out the podium in P3, and rounding out the points, we got Lando Norris P4, Hamilton P5, Daniel Ricciardo P6, Fernando Alonso P7, Carlos Sainz P8, George Russell P9, and Esteban Ocon rounds out the points in P10. Quite a tough race for Carlos Sainz as he went from 2nd all the way to 8th. Not really too sure what happened, probably some sort of damage or something, but now let's take a look at the standings. So the driver standings look like this. Max Verstappen is still in the lead with 260 points, followed by Charles Leclerc in P2. Sergio Perez has actually moved up to P3, followed by Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, both passing Carlos Sainz, which is a little bit embarrassing for him, as Sainz is in 6th in what is arguably the fastest car in the grid. Lando Norris in P7, followed by Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso, and Valtteri Bottas is in P10. Red Bull is still leading the constructor standings with Ferrari in P2, Mercedes in P3, and we have McLaren 5 points ahead of Alpine for P4. Now guys, we're gonna go ahead into the next race. Now heading into Zandvoort, this is what the development race looks like, and currently it looks like Red Bull and Mercedes brought a slight upgrade, Ferrari stayed even, McLaren brought a big upgrade to get closer to Ferrari, Alpine brought nothing, and looks like a bunch of teams in the bottom of the grid like Aston Martin, AlphaTauri, Haas brought some upgrades. Looks like Alfa Romeo and Williams did not, but let's see how this is going to change the grid heading into Zandvoort.
Look at our starting grid for today's race. An immense lap from Lewis Hamilton yesterday puts him on pole position, and it's Charles Leclerc in P2. Considering the rest of the grid, we have Russell, Perez, Carlos Sainz, and Verstappen, Norris, Fernando Alonso, Ricciardo, and Esteban Ocon, Bottas, Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda, and Joe, Albon, Magnussen, Lance Stroll, and Mick Schumacher, Vettel, and Lawrence. Which of these talented drivers will come out on top today? He could pull off the win here in Zandvoort, but they've done so in spectacular style. So Natalie, what do you think helped them deliver this result?
Well, this was a real team victory. They put together a solid strategy today that appeared well suited to the conditions out on track. The driver did everything that was expected of them in the moment to really execute the team's plan to perfection. A shining example of how F1 really is a team sport.
And I can see the drivers starting to approach the podium for the victory celebrations. A real team victory today. Everybody played their part. Congratulations then to Mercedes, your race winners.
And taking a look at Zandvoort, looks like Mercedes is back on top with a Mercedes 1-2 as George Russell wins his first ever Formula One race, starting from third. Great job for George as he took the fastest lap, beating Lewis Hamilton by 3 seconds. Quite impressive for him as he takes 26 points to max out his weekend. Lewis Hamilton, like I said, finishes in P2, and Charles Leclerc takes another podium. Finally, he gets 2 podiums in a row. It's been a while since he's done that. Max Verstappen finishes in P4 with Lando P5, Sergio Perez P6, Fernando Alonso P7, Daniel Ricciardo P8, Esteban Ocon P9, and Valtteri Bottas rounds out the top 10. In terms of the driver standings after Zandvoort, they look like this. Max Verstappen still has a massive lead in terms of the driver standings as he's at 272 points and Charles Leclerc is at 205. Sergio Perez is in P3 with 186. George Russell P4 with 181. He is only 5 points behind Sergio Perez now, so take a look at Mercedes. They might make a climb up really soon. Lewis Hamilton is in P5 with Carlos Sainz in P6. Lando Norris P7. Esteban Ocon at P8. Fernando Alonso is catching Ocon as he is in P9. And once again, Valtteri Bottas is still in P10. The constructor standings is where it gets a little bit spicy, with Red Bull by far on top. Ferrari and Mercedes are tied for P2 with 354 points, and McLaren now has an 11-point gap ahead of Alpine for P4. Alfa Romeo is in P5. Looks like Haas might try to catch them, but AlphaTauri is catching Haas. Aston Martin is catching both Haas and AlphaTauri, and Williams is in a sole dead last. Now, taking a look ahead into Monza, let's take a look at what upgrades some cars have brought. Mercedes has brought another upgrade, and Red Bull has brought a slight upgrade, nothing too crazy. Looks like Aston Martin and AlphaTauri, along with Haas, also brought upgrades, while Ferrari brought a small one, McLaren brought nothing, Alpine brought nothing, Alfa Romeo also brought nothing, and Williams once again brought no upgrades. So it looks like Mercedes is now the best car on the grid, so let's see what happens going into Monza.
It's time to see how our drivers are stacking up after yesterday's exciting qualifying session. It's Carlos Sainz in pole position, and Lewis Hamilton completes the front row. As we continue through the rest of the grid today, we have Leclerc, Perez, Lando Norris, and Russell, Fernando Alonso, Ocon, Ricciardo, and Pierre Gasly, Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher, Max Verstappen. They'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty, and Bottas, Vettel, Magnussen, Lance Stroll, and Alex Albon, Joe, and Lawrence. And with lights out just moments away, it's time to go down to the track. Race and a drive right out of the top draw to take the win for Red Bull today. So, Anthony, what made the difference out there today?
I think it was clear what the main contributing factor out on track was: speed. I know it sounds like an awfully reductive statement, but fast cars win races, and we saw that today with our winner.
The drivers are en route to the podium as we speak. What a fantastic win for the Red Bull team. They performed exceptionally today, keeping us firmly on the edge of our seats throughout the entirety of the race. Congratulations to everybody at the team.
For the second time this year, Sergio Perez has won a Grand Prix, and I believe this is for the fourth win of his career. Sergio Perez wins in Monza for Red Bull as he just barely beat Verstappen by not even a second as Verstappen finishes in P2. George Russell finishes in P3. Tough race for Charles Leclerc as he finished in fourth after starting third. Verstappen actually went from P13 to P2, so it looks like that Red Bull definitely did have the best car this weekend. Lando Norris finishes in P5, followed by Alonso P6, Ocon P7. I don't know what Carlos Sainz is doing, but once again, he finishes in P8 after starting on pole. P9 is Daniel Ricciardo, and P10 is Pierre Gasly. And taking a look at the driver standings after Monza, they look like this as Max Verstappen builds his lead to Charles Leclerc by probably like 80 points. This is crazy at this point. He's at 291. Charles Leclerc's in P2 with 217. Sergio Perez is getting closer to Leclerc as he's only 6 behind with 211. George Russell is at 196 in P4. Lewis Hamilton is at 173 in P5. And Carlos Sainz is at 153 in P6. We're really going to need Carlos Sainz to step it up if Ferrari has any shot at getting closer to even Red Bull or even just trying to beat Mercedes in terms of the standings. Lando Norris is in P7. He actually gets over 100 points now. He's at 104, followed by Ocon P8, Fernando Alonso P9, and Valtteri Bottas in P10. In terms of the constructor standings, Red Bull is still on top. Ferrari is 1 point ahead of Mercedes in P2. McLaren is in P4, Alpine P5, Alfa Romeo P6, Haas P7. Very close race still with Haas and AlphaTauri. Aston Martin is in P9, and once again, Williams remains in dead last. Now heading into Singapore, these are the teams that have brought some upgrades. Look like Mercedes brought a sort of solid upgrade. Red Bull brought a decent upgrade. Ferrari brought what looks to be a major upgrade package as I think they are going to be ahead of Red Bull. Now, I don't know why it said Red Bull's on top when Mercedes is clearly on top here, but oh well, who cares. McLaren brought a pretty solid upgrade. So did Alpine to counter McLaren's upgrade. It looks like Alfa Romeo surpassed Aston Martin and AlphaTauri as they brought what looks to be a very substantial upgrade. I'm probably the biggest upgrade package of this weekend. And also not doing anything, we have Haas and Williams. It kind of looks like Williams is just sort of flatlining at the moment. I don't know if they got a big upgrade coming up soon, but we'll see.
Let's run you through the driver grid order for today's exciting race. George Russell will begin today's event in pole position, edging out Max Verstappen, who'll start from P2. Looking at the rest of today's grid, we have Hamilton, Perez, Lando Norris and Leclerc, Ricciardo, Sainz, Fernando Alonso and Valtteri Bottas, Ocon, Vettel, Pierre Gasly and Magnussen, Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher, Alex Albon and Guan Yu Zhou, Lawrence and Lance Stroll brings the grid to a close. Now it's almost time for lights out, so let's go down to the track. Car, the Red Bull team are ready and waiting to celebrate a thoroughly deserved win. Natalie Pinkham, how do you think they were able to set themselves apart today?
I feel consistency was probably the key today. There's being quick, and then there's being quick lap after lap after lap. If you can do that, you can capitalise on other people's errors without making many of your own. And that's an approach that can push you a long way up the field.
Red Bull put up an outstanding fight for the front position today, and it's great to see it paid off for them. They do so much for the sport that you can't help but be delighted by today's race win.
And at the end of the Singapore Grand Prix, Max Verstappen finds himself in the win column once again as he wins from second on the grid. And following Max Verstappen on the podium, we have Lando Norris and George Russell. He took another pole. Great job, George. Charles Leclerc finishes in P4, followed by Carlos Sainz in P5, Sergio Perez P6, Daniel Ricciardo P7, Lewis Hamilton P8, Fernando Alonso P9, and Esteban Ocon P10. Looks like McLaren and probably Ferrari are gaining some ground on the cars a little bit behind them, which is really good to see. In terms of the standings after Singapore, Max Verstappen is almost 100 points ahead of Charles Leclerc now, as he's just... no one's going to catch him, let's be honest. We have Leclerc in P2, 9 points ahead of Sergio Perez in P3, followed by George Russell P4, Lewis Hamilton P5. Carlos Sainz is gaining ground on both of them in P6 with Lando Norris P7, Esteban Ocon P8, Fernando Alonso only 2 points behind Ocon now in P9, and once again Bottas still remains in P10, but it looks like Ricciardo is slowly catching him. In terms of the constructors standings, Red Bull is still way ahead. Ferrari now has a 4-point gap ahead of Mercedes. Looks like McLaren's got a 30-point gap ahead of Alpine now, so it looks like Alpine is falling off just a little bit. Alfa Romeo is in P6, Haas and AlphaTauri haven't moved, still P7, P8, and P9 and P10 we have Aston Martin and Williams. Now heading into Japan, we have 5 races to go. This is what the upgrade packages look like. Looks like Red Bull and Aston Martin and AlphaTauri and Haas, including Alpine, were the only teams that brought upgrades. Every other team did not, but it looks like Alpine is really trying to close that gap on McLaren. So maybe, just maybe, it'll make a difference heading into Japan.
So with the race not far away from starting, here's what today's grid rundown looks like. Lewis Hamilton lines up on pole position, and Max Verstappen lines up alongside. Moving on to the rest of the grid, we have Russell, Norris, Charles Leclerc, and Perez, Ricciardo, Sainz, Ocon, and Pierre Gasly, Fernando Alonso, Bottas, Kevin Magnussen, and Vettel, Mick Schumacher, Stroll, Alex Albon, and Guan Yu Zhou, Lawrence, and Yuki Tsunoda. With preparations almost complete, let's head down to the track. And with that, another year of Formula One draws to a close and a new World Drivers' Champion is declared. Another entry added to that prestigious list of the sport's most incredible drivers. That's a spectacular victory, and with it, the championship is secure. It's been a magnificent season, and they thoroughly deserve the cheers of the crowd here today. Anthony Davidson, what helped them deliver this result, do you think?
I think a large part of the result comes down to temperament. They were able to keep their heads when everyone around them was losing theirs, and that's allowed them to get the best out of the car, to maximise the strategy, and to stay out of trouble.
Red Bull are our winners today after showcasing some incredible driving. There's been a huge push from them lately to stay competitive with the other teams, and they're certainly proving themselves.
And after Japan, Max Verstappen, with 4 races to go, has officially clinched his second consecutive World Drivers' Championship as he absolutely dominated Japan. He had a 12-second lead ahead of Lando Norris in P2 and George Russell in P3 as they round out the podium. We have Lewis Hamilton in P4, followed by Sergio Perez P5, Charles Leclerc P6, Fernando Alonso P7, Daniel Ricciardo P8, Carlos Sainz P9, and Esteban Ocon P10. In terms of standings after Japan, once again, like I said, Max Verstappen has clinched his second consecutive World Drivers' Championship, with Charles Leclerc still hanging on in P2, followed by Sergio Perez P3, George Russell P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, Carlos Sainz P6, Lando Norris P7, Fernando Alonso is now past Esteban Ocon for P8, followed by Esteban Ocon in P9, and Valtteri Bottas is only 5 points ahead of Daniel Ricciardo in P10. In terms of the constructor standings, Red Bull, I believe, have sort of basically clinched the standings right now, as Mercedes have moved up to P2 as they are 13 points ahead of Ferrari, who are in P3. McLaren is in P4. They have a massive point gap ahead of Alpine in P5, with Alfa Romeo P6, Haas P7, AlphaTauri P8, Aston Martin P9, and Williams in dead last. Heading into the 4th last race is Circuit of the Americas. Looks like Red Bull and Ferrari both bring some substantial upgrades to surpass Mercedes. Looks like McLaren brought a small upgrade. Alpine have done nothing. The midfield of Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, Haas, and Aston Martin are all very close as they bring some major upgrades to Circuit of the Americas here. And finally, for the first time since I started this simulation, Williams has brought an upgrade. So let's see how this is going to shake up the grid in Circuit of the Americas.
Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the grid lineup for today's race. It's Carlos Sainz in pole position, and it's Lewis Hamilton alongside. Looking down the rest of the grid, we have Perez, Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, and Norris, Gasly, Bottas, Ocon, and Mick Schumacher, Tsunoda, Magnussen, Sebastian Vettel, and Albon, Russell, they've taken a grid penalty, Stroll, Guan Yu Zhou, and Lawrence, Ricciardo, they'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty, and Max Verstappen completes the grid. And now it's time to head down to the track. Great win under their belts. Well done to the whole team at Mercedes. So Natalie, what do you think helped them deliver this result?
Well, tyre management probably played quite a large role in the outcome of this one. As ever, it's not just about speed, it's about maintaining that speed consistently over a stint, over a race distance. So, being able to keep up the lap times while still being smooth on the controls, gentle on the tyres, that's where the race was won today.
Well, Mercedes are on top form once again after an excellent race weekend. It's great to see them up on that podium once again.
And in USA, Lewis Hamilton has finally done it, and he won a race this year. This is absolutely massive for him, as he has now continued a streak of winning a race in every single season since 2007, as he started P2 on the grid, but ended up finishing in first place. Carlos Sainz finishes in P2, great race for him, followed by George Russell P3, Lando Norris P4, Charles Leclerc P5. After that massive upgrade, looks like Verstappen had a grid penalty, Perez started in P3, but Red Bull finished P6 and P7, so a disappointing weekend for them. Daniel Ricciardo finishes in P8, followed by Fernando Alonso P9, and Esteban Ocon rounds out the top 10. In terms of driver and constructor standings, it looks like this. Once again, Max Verstappen is literally 101 points ahead of Charles Leclerc, who is in P2 in the standings. Leclerc is 6 points ahead of George Russell, who passed Sergio Perez for P3. Sergio Perez is now in P4. Lewis Hamilton is in P5. Carlos Sainz P6. Lando Norris P7. Fernando Alonso P8. Esteban Ocon P9. And Bottas is now 1 point ahead of Daniel Ricciardo for P10. Red Bull is still in P1. It looks like Mercedes now has a 25-point gap ahead of Ferrari in P2. McLaren is in P3. McLaren is in P4, Alpine is in P5, and the rest of the grid has really stayed the same. We now have 3 races to go, and looks like some more teams have brought some upgrades heading into Mexico. Looks like Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Haas, and Williams all brought some upgrades heading into this race, as Alpine, I believe it is AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, and Aston Martin all have not brought any, so it might do something. Maybe the little bit of the midfield will change a bit, but we'll see how this changes the grid in Mexico.
Let's run you through the driver grid order for today's exciting sprint. Lando Norris will lead us away from pole position, edging out Sergio Perez, who lines up P2. Considering the rest of the grid, we have Leclerc, Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, and Hamilton, Russell, Ricciardo, Fernando Alonso, and Esteban Ocon, Bottas, Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda, and Magnussen, Mick Schumacher, Vettel, Lance Stroll, and Alex Albon, Joe, and Lawrence. Which of these drivers will get pole position today? We'll soon find out.
The Max Verstappen dominance in Mexico continues, as he won another race this year, taking fastest lap, beating Charles Leclerc in Ferrari by 14 seconds, which is, wow, that's a massive lead there, but it makes sense because Red Bull does have the fastest car in this simulation. We got Lewis Hamilton in P3, followed by George Russell in P4. Sergio Perez is in his home race finishes in P5, followed by Daniel Ricciardo P6. Carlos Sainz P7, Lando Norris P8, Fernando Alonso P9, and look at this guy, Sebastian Vettel finally gets another point in this simulation as he finishes in P10. In terms of the standings, once again, nothing really has changed as Verstappen is in P1, Charles Leclerc is in P2 as he builds a slight gap ahead of George Russell in P3, Perez P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, Carlos Sainz in P6, followed by Lando Norris P7, Fernando Alonso P8, Esteban Ocon P9, and Daniel Ricciardo has actually passed Bottas for P10 in the standings. Red Bull, I believe, have clinched the Constructors' Championship so far, with Mercedes P2, Ferrari P3, McLaren P4, Alpine P5, Alfa Romeo P6, Haas, AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, and Williams have not changed, minus that 1 point that Vettel just got for Aston Martin. Heading into Brazil, where we have a sprint race and a regular race, and it looks like some teams have brought some pretty big upgrades heading into Brazil, as Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Alpine, Aston Martin, AlphaTauri, and I believe Alfa Romeo and Williams. Looks like Haas was really the only team, maybe AlphaTauri, I can't really see their line there, but looks like maybe Haas and AlphaTauri were the only two teams that did not bring an upgrade here to Brazil. Maybe that'll hamper them a little bit, but let's see what really happens. In the sprint race, Lando Norris actually won the sprint race, which is kind of crazy as he takes 8 points, followed by McLaren P2, Carlos Sainz P3, Verstappen P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, Sergio Perez P6, George Russell P7, Fernando Alonso P8, Ricciardo P9, and Esteban Ocon P10. That is going to be your top 10 heading in to the main race on Sunday. And on the main race, Max Verstappen ends up winning again as he got the most points this weekend with 30, followed by Charles Leclerc in P2, Lando Norris P3, Sergio Perez P4, George Russell P5, Carlos Sainz P6, Lewis Hamilton P7, Fernando Alonso P8, Daniel Ricciardo P9, and Esteban Ocon in P10.
It's time to take a look at our starting grid for today's race. Lando Norris put in a fantastic lap yesterday, and he'll start from pole position, with Charles Leclerc alongside. As we continue through the rest of the grid today, we have Verstappen, Perez, George Russell, and Fernando Alonso, Ricciardo, Ocon, Bottas, and Yuki Tsunoda. Sainz, they've taken a grid penalty, Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel, and Stroll. Lawrence, Gasly, they'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. Mick Schumacher and Guan Yu Zhou, they've taken a grid penalty. Albon and Kevin Magnussen fills the last spot on the grid. That's it then, it's time to go racing as we head down trackside for today's race. But the championship as well. What a spectacular season they've had. Congratulations to the whole team. Talk to me, Ant. What was it that set them apart from the competition today?
I really feel the track layout combined with the track temperatures we saw today suited their car. These cars come alive when the tyres are just at the right temperature, and the driver did a great job managing that as well. They just look so comfortable out there. It's like anything, it always looks so easy when it all just clicks.
Here come today's winners. The team at Red Bull have done a phenomenal job recently, and it's clear to see that they've put in the work, and they should be so proud of the victory they secured here.
In the standings after Brazil, Max Verstappen is still ahead in P1. He is absolutely dominating. It's not even close. Charles Leclerc is in P2, and it looks like with one race to go, he's got a pretty safe P2. George Russell is in P3, followed by Sergio Perez in P4. Lewis Hamilton in P5, followed by Carlos Sainz P6. Lando Norris P7. Fernando Alonso P8, Esteban Ocon P9, and Daniel Ricciardo in P10. Red Bull basically they've already won the constructor standings, followed by Mercedes P2. It is a close battle between Mercedes and Ferrari here. It'll really come down to Abu Dhabi, but honestly guys, I'd put my money on Mercedes if I were you, if you were betting. McLaren is in P4 as they are way ahead of Alpine in P5, Alfa Romeo P6, Haas P7, AlphaTauri P8, Aston Martin P9, and Williams is still in dead last. And heading into the final race in Abu Dhabi, let's see what teams have brought some upgrades. It looks like Ferrari and Mercedes have brought upgrades to basically put them on par with Red Bull. Maybe Alfa Romeo brought a slight upgrade, and Williams has also brought a slight upgrade to catch up to the rest of the grid. But it looks like every other team is saving resources for 2023. So let's see what happens in the final race in Abu Dhabi.
It's time to take a look at our starting grid for today's race. Charles Leclerc lines up on pole position, and a very happy Carlos Sainz will start second. Looking at the rest of today's grid, we have Perez, Ocon, Fernando Alonso, and Gasly. Norris, they'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. Mick Schumacher, Verstappen, they've taken a grid penalty, and Valtteri Bottas, Russell, Stroll, and Sir Lewis Hamilton, and Albon, Ricciardo, Lawrence, Sebastian Vettel, and Kevin Magnussen. They'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. Tsunoda and Guan Yu Zhou. It's almost time for the lights to go out, so let's head down to the track where preparations are underway. The season, but they can go into the winter with their heads held high after an emphatic victory here today. What do you think it was today, Ants, that gave them the edge over the competition?
Well, I honestly feel it was down to the driver and car today. I mean, we can talk driver skill all day, but if you don't have a solid team to back that, you're never going to get anywhere. When you hit that sweet spot of having both an excellent driver and an incredible car, that's when you see results like those we witnessed today.
Looking at the podium, you can see that red suit familiar to fans across the globe. A world-class win for a world-class team. Ferrari do it again.
The final race of the year was taken by Charles Leclerc as he finally wins another race. Thank God. I believe the last time he won a race was the first one in Spa, so that's fun. Max Verstappen finishes in P2 with George Russell P3 with fastest lap, Lando Norris P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, and Carlos Sainz in P6. Very tough end of the season for Carlos Sainz. Fernando Alonso finishes P7, followed by Daniel Ricciardo P8. A brutal race for Sergio Perez drops him down to P9, and Esteban Ocon finishes in P10. At the end of the season, this is what the driver's standings look like. Max Verstappen absolutely dominated as once again we know he won his second consecutive World Drivers' Championship, followed by Charles Leclerc, who had quite a solid end to the season as he finishes in P2. George Russell in his first season in Mercedes finishes in P3. Sergio Perez finishes in P4 with Lewis Hamilton in P5, Carlos Sainz in P6, Lando Norris in P7, Fernando Alonso at P8, Esteban Ocon in P9, and Daniel Ricciardo in P10. Fernando Alonso's name is great out there. It's because in this career save, he is retiring at the end of the year, but I'll try to do a 2023 simulation soon where Alonso doesn't retire. And now let's take a look at the constructor standings as Red Bull completely dominated. Mercedes did end up beating Ferrari by 9 points, and that is all because Carlos Sainz did not perform well at the end of the season. I don't know if Ferrari will drop him. Maybe they should, because Leclerc was 107 points ahead of Carlos Sainz by the end of the year. McLaren ended up finishing in P4 with Alpine in P5, Alfa Romeo P6, Haas P7, AlphaTauri P8, Aston Martin P9, and Williams in dead last. So guys, that is going to wrap it up for this remainder of the year simulation video. If you guys did enjoy and you want to see more videos like this from me, then go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Once again, we are on the road to 20K. Not sure if this video is going to go up before or after we reach it, but if we did reach it, thank you guys so much. If we didn't, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. We can get there as soon as possible. And with that being said, guys, let me know what was the biggest surprise in this simulation. Was it that George Russell beat Hamilton? Was it that Mercedes beat Ferrari, which is not surprising? Was it how badly McLaren actually ended up destroying Alpine? Who really knows? But with that being said, everybody, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.